Do you know what that is?
Sounds like an ad for a very special brand.
Sounds very happy clappy. What is it, Rob?
It's Etisalat celebrating a Manchester City title a few years ago. All very relevant, of course, because Manchester City and their sponsors back under scrutiny yet again. A big topic on this week's episode. Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. Joining me, Rob Harris from Sky News as ever, Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq Panja from The New York Times. Much to get into on the Premier League investigations, meetings, the racist football poll in Germany, the ineligible top scorer from last year's AFCON, cricket in the US, prize money for a new athletics competition. But as ever, we've talked about him so often, Salt Bae. How did we miss him last weekend?
Probably because we were not in the VIP seats at the Champions League final, Rob.
Could not believe that on Sunday when we saw his Insta post inside the inner sanctum of the Champions League final at Wembley after all that happened at the World Cup final in Qatar.
Just remind us what happened at the World Cup final.
Went on to the pitch of the World Cup final, which you're not allowed to do. He broke protocol by actually touching the World Cup trophy. Again, that's not something you're allowed to do. He'd somebody who had been having regular sort of photo ops with Gianni Infantino before that, and I think FIFA were embarrassed about this, and it sounds like they've made him a bit sort of persona non grata at their events. But there he was, Champions League final, selfie alert, because where Salt Bae goes, the selfie camera goes, and a couple of people were caught by him.
No Salt Bae, no party. Of course, this was a UEFA event, not a FIFA event. So maybe they didn't get the memo.
You wonder how much people were being ambushed by a selfie. How much can you say no when some person suddenly comes up to you to get a photo without seeming like you're being rude? The FA chair, Debbie Hewitt, was caught in one of the pictures. It was posted on Insta the next day.
Yeah, wasn't the UEFA president also posing in a photo with him, Rob?
Yeah, no, I'm sure that everybody does. But as you say, when I suppose when you pose for a selfie, you may not think it's going to be all over his millions of followers on social media. But this was a UEFA event. He was in the UEFA VIP area. My understanding, he was invited by the Asian Football Confederation because they have a number of guests that they can invite to that particular area.
But he is mighty popular, isn't he, in football circles? Remember Mikel Arteta, the Arsenal manager, the Arsenal team had a mid-season break in the UAE, and one of the first stops for Arteta was at the Salt Bae's top table. That must be some mighty fine meat this fellow's selling to get all these people to attend his restaurant, guys.
Because within days, he was then with Jose Mourinho in Turkey after he went to take charge at Fenerbahce. So he's certainly gone from, one big football occasion to getting himself attached to the big story of the week. Well, internationally outside of the Premier League.
Yeah, I don't think is he particularly. Is it a good bargain going to some of his restaurants? Cheap, good food served cheaply, is it?
Well, certainly, Martyn. If you want to invite us, we'll you send us a date. We'll let you know on one of these editions of the pod whether it's good value. Rob, on the Champions League, any other issues apart from the Turkish meat seller Salt Bae at the final?
Well, as far as we know, he wasn't one of the ticketless fans trying to get in, but that was one of the issues that certainly was in the fallout. The number of fans that tried to get in without tickets, we don't know who they supported, or were they locals using their chance to sort of try to jump the stewards. The FA insisting that no one without a ticket did get in, although they think that might have happened post-match for the celebrations, because obviously the gates open and people leave, so then you can come back in, raising all sorts of security questions. One thing that did stand out, and this is always was going to be the case, UEFA put that statement out praising the fans in Dublin at the Europa League final, the Atalanta fans and the Bayer Leverkusen fans. No statement after the Wembley final praising the FA, Wembley, or any of the fans from Real Madrid and Borussia Dortmund.
No. And just on your earlier point, one of the reporters from the Daily Mail, whatever the FA might say, he claimed to have bribed a steward to to get into the stadium, didn't he? In a report in that newspaper. So there's at least one person who shouldn't have been there found his way into the stadium, and I think the Metropolitan Police, said 53 arrests. Is it, Rob? About that?
Yeah, that was it. And of course, those dangerous scenes of the pyrotechnics as well look great from the Dortmund fans. We were sitting at the final; it was just to our left, but could have been something a lot more dangerous.
Yeah, I think it'd been quite difficult for any messages of congratulations to go out when actually at the start of the match you had 3 separate people running onto the pitch. Would it be seen to be a bit strange if you then said, "Oh, well done, the fans," and you've just had the sort of the final of this tournament basically halted because of this happening?
I would say, as a fan, the noise the Borussia Dortmund fans brought to the stadium was just spectacular. From way before the start of the game, even after their team lost, the amount of support, the sound of those supporters was spectacular. And you kind of, you do want to be at those events where this happens. Real Madrid obviously are used to, it's almost their trophy. They come, expect to win and go. Their fans were fine, good enough. But the Borussia Dortmund fans were almost like a bygone age. The colour and the noise, it was spectacular.
And they brought a bit of their politics as well. There was a banner against sports washing, wasn't there?
There was not the only banner. There's a banner against sports washing, and also, and this is very interesting, obviously they're there to support their team, but they also aren't happy with everything their own club does. And there was a banner opposing, we talked about it on the pod last week, this sponsorship with Rheinmetall, the military weapons company. And it shows how you can support your players, your team, but you don't have to agree with everything your club does.
That's not something that's a factor of Manchester City fandom, is it? Not to overly generalise, but looking at social media, you get them very much on the defensive whenever they perceive their club is under attack. Well, what a week it's been. Manchester City's legal action against the Premier League being revealed by Matt Lawton in the Times newspaper. An action against, and now we're going to be getting to quite a bit of terminology some are familiar with, some aren't, these associated party transactions. This is on top of the Premier League case, the 115 charges against City for the alleged financial rule breaches, which are being contested by City. So, if we strip it all back, what's the new case? Why are they suing the Premier League?
So this is all about associated party deals. So there's always been a thing in the Premier League, your sponsorship deals have to be fair market value. And it's same with UEFA, and they can be judged as being inflated. We saw that with Qatar's sponsorship of PSG. UEFA sort of knocked that back, and I think they did with Manchester City about 10 years ago. However, in 2021, December 21, after the Newcastle takeover, they toughened the rules in the Premier League. It basically said that if the Premier League's board has reasonable grounds to suspect that an associated party deal or otherwise than at arm's length from the club, then an independent panel will determine whether it's of fair market value. And then again, February this year, and this was the sort of tipping point, it seems, for Manchester City, they toughened the rules again, and they made clubs liable to be charged with the breach of the rules if they do not use all reasonable care to ensure deals are of fair market value. And the burden of proof is also on the clubs to show they are. Tariq, the other interesting thing about this is up until 2020, it was only viewed as an associated party deal if it was stated as such in a club's accounts. Manchester City has never said that its sponsorship deals with Etihad, for example, are a related party transaction. So that has changed, and now you have to get approval before these deals are signed off, whereas beforehand you could do the deal and then it would be judged if it was fair market value. That's what Manchester City are saying is against competition law.
Yeah, and it's clever that as well. You mentioned Man City have always said they're not a state-owned club as well, haven't they? They've said that this is a private investment from His Highness Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan. Now, that means that Etihad and all of these companies, he might be the deputy prime minister, the brother of the ruler of the autocratic state. But all those companies are somehow not tied to them, even though I think that 4 of their main sponsors all hail from the UAE and Abu Dhabi. This was reported in February that Manchester City were taking legal action. A few more details. But what Matt Lawton has been able to do, what's made it, I think, really significant, it seems to have got documents related to what Manchester City are going to say. And it's not a court case, it's a tribunal. Some of the language, guys, some of the language in that case is quite spectacular.
One particular phrase, the tyranny of the majority. We can get into that in a second. That's talking about the way other Premier League clubs can vote against them. But on the specifics of the sponsorship, our effective what Manchester City are saying is we're not related to any of these parties, but if we want them to be able to pay more than the market rate to be able to put a load of cash into the club.
Correct. They are saying it's not up to you to decide. If someone somewhere in the world decides that, look, putting a name on our shirt or on a billboard is worth £1 billion, for example, to them, that's their prerogative. You can't say what someone's willing to pay. And guess what? They've probably got a load of people lined up. Guys, they're not on their own, though, are they? They seem to have support for this.
Well, the associated parties rules that were passed in February was the closest ever vote in Premier League history. So 12 clubs voted against it. And there were a couple of abstentions, which meant they just sneaked past the 2/3 majority required. So that's why these tougher rules are enforced. But it failed the first time it went to the vote. It narrowly failed. They tried again, and this time it went through by that. I think it was Burnley actually changing its position and abstaining this time. Caused fury amongst those people like Manchester City, who basically think this is another way of the old powerful clubs, Manchester United, Liverpool type clubs, trying to do them down.
Name names, please. Name names. Who is supporting them? Who are we talking about here? Who's backing them in this lawsuit?
Well, we know Aston Villa have voted behind them. Newcastle have also voted against the associated party deals. Obviously, that after the takeover by Saudi Arabia, that sort of hastened these rule changes. And I think at the time, actually, Amanda Staveley wrote a letter in December 2021 warning of potential legal challenges.
So, of course, this is Manchester City coming up against the Premier League's democracy, where you need 14 out of 20 clubs to back something going through. If one abstains, then the voting changes down to, say, 13 in favour.
Chelsea also seem to be backing Manchester City in this case. And you're right. It's kind of ironic, this language of the tyranny of democracy. And the point here is that the Premier League requires this 2/3 majority to change rules. So yes, the APT thing is the point of the legal argument, but it's far bigger than that, because Man City are challenging the very nature of a 2/3 majority required. They've also said there's discrimination against owners from the Gulf and things. But if the 2/3 majority, if they're able to win this throws out the whole way of doing business in the Premier League since 1992. And just one last thing here. You mentioned Aston Villa is supporting them. Something I found interesting, the billionaire Egyptian owner of Aston Villa, the Egyptian Nassef Sawiris, just happened to move all of his holdings and all of his business to the UAE and to Abu Dhabi in particular. Now, look, it might be nothing to do with this, probably isn't. But again, it's this thing. When you have a country owning a football team, there are so many levers that they can pull that normal businesses simply can't.
And many pointing out the fact that Sheikh Mansour is vice president of a country without democratic government. Barney Ronay from The Guardian tweeted, an autocratic government is suing the Premier League because it doesn't like the rules and wants more power over English football. That's pretty weird. You've got, from a different end of the political spectrum, that's from the left in terms of papers, from the right, the Daily Telegraph, saying Oliver Brown. There's a persecution complex that permeates every facet of their legal case. And he goes on to say their claim to be the victims of discrimination, to their tone-deaf portrayal of tyranny of the majority, highlighting how this can be the case when they were the first English club to spend more than £400 million on annual wages, that they're hardly disadvantaged. A club not liking the fact it has to follow a democratic process of the Premier League and claiming to be victims.
Yeah, the democracy angle is very important, and it's how the Premier League has been run ever since it was set up. And I think that's something that the clubs who are looking on this think is something that's under threat, effectively. Even more so that they're worried about is that the legal case involves a claim for compensation against the Premier League. In effect, that's against the 19 clubs. Damages, they say, for the document cited by Matt Lawton says for delays, for expenses. I mean, who knows how much money that's going to be? And that effectively, if they win, that will be coming out of the other clubs' coffers. And I think a lot of people think this is a sort of, perhaps, one of the biggest, most important cases that the Premier League is facing, even more in a way than the 115 charges, which we'll get onto, because it's the whole way the Premier League is governed. The vote, the fact that actually if they lose this, they're losing the power to make decisions themselves almost, and you could even claim that handing it over to, well, not necessarily Abu Dhabi, but handing it over to clubs to basically put as much money as they want into the system.
And why does all this matter? It's about competitive balance. It was talked about being one of the most exciting Premier League seasons last year, but of course, let's remember all three promoted teams went straight back down. The title did go down to the final day, but the top four places were all settled before the final weekend. And obviously the fear is if there is unrestricted spending, it could cement their dominance even more. And City will often say they've not broken the world record in any position, but they have broken British records. They do have talent stacked in every position. The fact you can have a £100 million player, Jack Grealish, who barely plays all year and of course then doesn't end up in the Euro squad with England. Particularly for City fans who expect to be listening and be aggrieved by this, they aren't the first to spend a lot. Sunderland back in 1950 were known as the Bank of England club because they spent so much money. They broke the world transfer record. Blackburn won the Premier League title for the only time in 1995 because of all the spending of Jack Walker, a local businessman who decided to invest a lot of money in. They eventually went in a spiral of decline when, of course, that investment stopped. So they aren't the first team to spend a lot, and Manchester United have spent a lot in the last decade, in particular post-Fergie, without any similar success. It's often the fact if you have this underlying wealth, you can take, greater risks on player signings, can't you? Because, ultimately there's no, there's less consequence if you get a move wrong.
Yeah, you mentioned all of those teams, Rob, but none of them won the league in British history 4 times in a row. And but for Liverpool winning that solitary title, it could have been 7 league titles. And that is a huge risk. And look, you mentioned, and they built that squad very, very well. You mentioned it's stacked. You mentioned Jack Grealish, who, has been front and centre of all the celebrations when it comes to the parties after the stadiums, and he's very popular with the public, and he's kind of an expression of joy coming out of that club. But he is, as you said, he's not starred on the field. I can't imagine there are that many football clubs in the world that can have £100 million worth of talent not perform. Often that would mean the manager might not be able to put a team out that can win. They've also been able to do another thing. They've bought players, as you said, maybe not the world record, but in all their positions between 40 to 70 million pounds. And that is quite a lot of money. And they've also been allowed to let them bed in. So you could have a season where they learn the style of playing under Pep, doing almost nothing, playing 4 or 5 games, and then it's just this way of building a team that almost nobody else can aspire to.
The Manchester City chairman, Khaldoon Al-Mubarak, has given his annual interview with the club's website. So he says that the rules introduced during the past 12 months, which is clearly referring to the associated party rules, it says will make the Premier League less competitive. He said you won't see the same level of competition as we've seen in the last years because of the levels of regulations that have come into place over the last 12 months. Do you buy that?
Why though? Why is he saying that? Because let's be honest, the sponsorships we're talking about, let's talk about them. Arba, Etisalat, Etihad, for example, Abu Dhabi Tourism, another one. Now, if he's saying that they were all above board and they didn't breach any associated party transactions rules and they were all at fair value, why would that affect anything? Man City have been winning with the rules. So unless he's saying that that amount of money that they've made is not enough or something else is afoot, it just raises even more questions for me because those sponsorships, a lot of them have been in place since 2008, 2009.
And it's where the balance is. They're saying that they would have more success. Would it be good for the Premier League if you had the same team winning every year? Would it be good for European football if City won a treble every single year? Obviously, they've only won the Champions League once, been to 2 finals. You mentioned the sponsorships. Of course, that was Etisalat's ad we heard at the start of the pod there. And what is he saying? Are they missing out on these players? And would it be better for the Premier League if there was unrestricted income coming into City that they could spend? And would it be better for the Premier League, say, if Mbappe was joining and a host of other stars this summer and they're all in City's team, or would it create a greater imbalance?
Exactly. I think all their rivals, or most of their rivals anyway, would say it probably does. Girona is in the City Football Group. They've just signed a sponsorship deal with Etihad, which is obviously the main sponsor for Manchester City. There's lots of suggestions.
How did they manage to secure that deal, I wonder?
Yes.
Know a man who knows a man, maybe.
Lots of suggestions that there's a big new Etihad deal about to be announced by Manchester City, and they're waiting for the outcome of this arbitration case before they decide, because I imagine the size of it is going to be determined by the outcome of the case.
And of course, since the last deal was signed, City have gone on to greater success. They have greater prominence. They're claiming this week they are the most watched Premier League club in the US. Let's check on that. Etihad would need the profile of Manchester City because there are airline battles at the moment in the Gulf between the state-funded carriers. You've got Emirates who are building a whole new airport base in Dubai. You've got the new Riyadh that will be launching in Saudi Arabia. So there's a legitimate reason why they would want to use sport Manchester City to grow their profile even more. The question is, how much is it worth?
Yeah, but I don't think there's going to be any competition for that shirt front from those other 2 airlines. And, and in terms of the pricing, the market knows the price. The question I had, guys, how does this affect? We talked about these APT rules, all the chaos of this week. How does this affect the 115 charges Manchester City have been fighting since 2018, the allegations? And what are they again?
These are the charges that were levelled by the Premier League against City in early 2023. And we've got breaches of failing to provide accurate and up-to-date information. That's from 2009 to 2018. Failure to cooperate with Premier League investigations over several years. Failure to provide accurate financial reports in terms of player and manager compensation, breaches of the profit and sustainability rules in the Premier League, failure to comply with the UEFA regulations. So we get more into that again. Something of note is the failure to cooperate. Why is that so key? Well, because we've been hearing this week from Khaldoon Al-Mubarak, the City chairman. We can get into that in a moment about the fact it's an internal interview. He said about the case, it's taking longer than anyone hoped for, but there is a process we have to go through. I've always repeated, let's be judged by the facts and not by claims and counterclaims. So what's the reason for the delay?
Yeah, that's interesting because this case was initially started way back in 2018 following the football leaks. And it took ages, 2023, as you said, Rob, to get the actual charges out, the 115 or so charges filed by the Premier League. In between that time, there was a High Court case in which I think a judge had even questioned how long it'd been taking, these delays, because there were so many blocks and letters sent to kind of impinge this process.
Yeah, I mean, it did seem that everything was possible was being challenged. I think Manchester City initially challenged the investigatory panel that was set up by the Premier League. So it has dragged on and on. I think the interesting thing is, does the associated party legal challenge, which starts next week, going to last a couple of weeks, does that have any impact on the 115 charges? Now, nothing. The easy answer is nothing directly. They're not connected. I think the more subtle, nuanced view that a lot of people are taking, and this includes a lot of Premier League club people, is that this is another sort of tactic. Manchester City, the attack is the best form of defence, so the attack in the Premier League before the 115 charges are heard in November, and tying up they haven't got the biggest legal department in the world, so they're going to tying them up with this. Does that affect the amount of attention they can give to building their case? So. And I think there's just a general feeling that this is a sort of, there's one of the Football Leaks emails.
Yes, it was actually City's lawyer Simon Cliff quoting Khaldoon Al-Mubarak that he would rather spend 30 million on the 50 best lawyers in the world to sue them for the next 10 years. Can you see if they do win this associated party transactions case, that then if they were to be found to have committed breaches of any of the 115 charges, then it muddies the water because they can claim, yeah, but we've already proven that related rules shouldn't exist. Although that's not what the 115 charges is about.
To be honest,
you can undermine the verdict.
I think this conversation, in a way, is muddying the waters as well, because the law is the law. Let's just go back a second. These cases relate to what happened between 2009 and 2018. Nothing to do with associated party transaction rules or anything like that. This is a case related to that. I agree with Martyn in a way that, throwing more and more kind of legal obstacles, new cases, it really sort of takes up the Premier League's time and efforts and money, crucially, to deal with all of this.
So when are we expecting a ruling on this City arbitration against the Premier League?
It's difficult to know. So the hearing, I think, will take a couple of weeks. There will be several weeks after that. So I imagine that it could be sometime towards the end of July, maybe, at the earliest.
So that would be before the season starts. We did mention it, the Khaldoon Al-Mubarak interview. He only gives it to City's internal media. It's a former journalist who conducts it. So no media get to ask their own independent questions. And this is always the case. So it's on their terms, where they're complaining in particular about why do people bring up the 115 charges. Khaldoon saying it's frustrating. The referencing is always frustrating. He talks about the charges being constantly referenced. But it is just a factual bit of context, the fact the case is ongoing. It doesn't mean you undermine the achievements of every single result and every match.
It's a factual bit, and it's such a vital thing. Just step back away from this for a second. This is the Premier League's best team, the team that's won the league for 4 years. It's been accused of essentially cheating the Premier League for a decade while it's achieved all of this success. It must be awful for their fans that this happens, but it's also awful for the Premier League and its standing. It's incredible, to be honest.
But also, it's not referenced that often. Some actually say it's not referenced enough by the media.
Well, it is. Whether it's some people think it's referenced too much. Some people will think it's not referenced enough, depending on your viewpoint. But actually, in terms of access and speaking to people, I don't think Manchester City have ever put an executive up to talk about anything since they were actually, way before they were charged, and almost since the investigations. I remember in Istanbul for the Champions League draw about just a couple of years ago, Ferran Soriano, the chief executive, came for the draw, and the head of communications took him to speak to the TV cameras about the draw only, and refused to put him in front of the newspapers because he was worried about what might be asked.
We have seen Ferran Soriano on conference panels, but not being asked about any of the sort of wider scrutiny.
No, and certainly no one from Abu Dhabi, be it Khaldoon or Sheikh Mansour or even maybe Simon Pearce, another board member of Manchester City, who seems to be intrinsically involved with how City's been run over the last 10 or so years.
And of course, as all this was unfolding about City this week, where were the City chiefs and all the other Premier League execs at their annual meeting of clubs? I wonder what it was like in the room there.
It must have been a bit frosty, I think, for sure. But mind you, they've got, Manchester City got friends themselves, so maybe the room was split.
And of course, financial regulations were high on the agenda. The ever-changing world of regulation in the Premier League. It was about the new cost controls that are coming in, emulating the UEFA ones. Now, this is all about restricting how much you can spend on your squad in relation to the income that you have. There'll be a phased introduction that will eventually reach a 70% threshold if you want to compete in European competitions. So where did we end up this week at the Premier League meeting in terms of phasing them in and having a shadow system?
Yeah, they're going to trial it on a shadow trial next season. They're going to have the squad cost control like UEFA have, but 85%. And they're also going to trial this anchoring system, which we've talked about before, where your level of spending is tied to the income the bottom club receives in TV money. So maybe say the bottom club gets 100 odd million, you can spend 5 times that on your football costs. There is an issue here with the PFA, the Players' Union. They may object to it. They probably will. So I think the shadow trial will also involve a year of some fairly lengthy talks to the Players' Union.
In some characterizations, it's a salary cap, so they'll see restrictions potential on how much players can earn. In part, it's about that thing we talk about often, competitive balance, because particularly with competitions like the new FIFA Club World Cup, if you're to get a huge flow of income disproportionate to your rivals, then it could distort the competition. I mean, if you say in theory a club generates £1 billion, it's to try and limit how much of that can be spent.
Yeah, this has always been the issue, hasn't it, with distribution. We still haven't seen what the distribution for that Club World Cup is. We haven't seen a lot of details of that. But, I say this quite often, so I won't keep this long. But there has to be other ways of managing football and competitive balance than purely financial rules. People are able to go around those. There should be other ideas, but we're just not seeing them at all.
Yeah, and just very quickly to mention on the anchoring thing again, which almost circles back into everything we've been talking about, the 3 clubs that voted against anchoring, Manchester United, Manchester City and Aston Villa.
Another vote took place as well. It went 19-1 with Wolves, the only club, vote in favour of their own plan to scrap VAR. So VAR stays, but with some changes to try to make it more accessible to fans, to reduce some of the delays is the intention. But they're not following Sweden in terms of having no video replays.
No, difficult. I mean, Sweden voted not to bring it in, which is different, isn't it? I think putting the toothpaste back in the tube is impossible. And I think Wolves knew that. They just wanted to sort of mark a debate, make a point. They've had some things go against them. Well, what would you have voted, Tariq?
I'll be with the Wolves, I'm afraid. I've always said this. There's even more arguments now and more outcry, hand-wringing, angry managers, players, fans, than there was when referees were making mistakes in the moment. If we got all this anger, why not just go back to what it was like before, and we can just kind of enjoy the football and accept the errors from time to time?
Rob, you live in the world of video and TV these days. How do you think?
I would have kept it anyway. It's not the technology that isn't working, it's the personnel using it. You need more decisive decision making rather than dithering. But you can see, having been in the VAR booth for demos myself, that once you put in the heat of the moment, that you can start procrastinating and dithering over decisions. So I would perhaps look towards introducing time limits, keeping it onto those where the biggest errors might have been made. And of course, mentioned it before, some of the minute assessments of offside are just absolutely crazy when it's just one tiny part of the body.
I think time limits is a really good idea, by the way, because I think if you can't decide it in 30 seconds, it's not obvious enough.
But of course, there is going to be automated offsides coming in.
That should make things quicker, but you will still have those. In fact, you probably have more of those fairly sort of marginal decisions.
Yeah. Well, that's the Premier League meeting. We still had the current leadership of Everton representing them there, but they're in an absolute mess, aren't they? This 777 takeover has collapsed. What turmoil that investment group has brought.
Yeah, I mean, also Farhad Moshiri, the Everton owner, dragging this out for as long as they have. Awful period for Everton fans, a lot of uncertainty. The 777 company, they're not free of Everton. They've, don't forget, have got £200 million loan to Everton. There's a good chance they won't get any of that back should the worst happen. And I was hearing this week that a team they do own, the London Lions, a basketball team, staff who work there, by no means on high salaries, did not receive their paychecks, most recent paychecks. So still the sports industry having to deal with the fallout of the association with 777 partners.
Yeah, it's been a car crash which has been sort of coming down the motorway for a very, very long time, and you can see what's happening. And I mean, the London Lions Basketball Club, wages haven't been paid there on time. That they own half of the 777 owns half of the British Basketball League. Lots of concerns about what's the future of the clubs there. So it's a turmoil.
And this after the London Lions became the first European winners of a European basketball trophy only in April.
And then they scrapped the women's team.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, and you've got to think for the players involved as well who face all this uncertainty too.
Absolutely.
Well, looking beyond the world of British sport, so much else going on elsewhere in football. One thing to mention briefly from the European Club Association, Juventus are back in the fold, having originally been chucked out after being the Super League instigators in 2021 with Barcelona and Real Madrid.
Yeah, that was a decision taken just before the Champions League final meeting in London. All is forgiven. Come back, Juventus. Andreas Agnelli's no longer there.
The groundwork for this had been laid actually by Nasser Al-Khelaifi in an interview I did with him during the Qatar World Cup when he opened the door to their return of a different leadership, abandoning the Super League project, not part of A22. Just shows how things are normalised because obviously the English club's back in the ECA fold as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Super League, in terms of the fallout, there was no real punishments meted out in the end, given the size of the scandal at the time. Juventus now being run by, of course, Andrea Agnelli's cousin, John Elkann. So the Agnelli family is in control of Juventus. It's another branch of it, and a bit of clearing house there as well, with the main executives having left Juventus.
Turkey aren't a club often at the top of the European game, but they've certainly brought a big name in this week to coach in terms of Fenerbahce and Jose Mourinho. What's most interesting about this in terms of transparency, it seems a rarity. They actually announced his salary to the stock exchange. So he's going to earn 10.5 million euros a year in his 2-year contract. No mention of bonuses, though.
A spectacular salary for Mourinho, who still draws big paychecks. And I couldn't imagine a person more kind of suited to the combustible nature of club football in Turkey. And we remember, some of us remember Graham Souness when he was manager of Galatasaray, almost causing a stampede when he ran onto the field at Fenerbahce Stadium and planted the Galatasaray flag at the centre circle. I do wonder if we're going to see similar antics about winding up the opposition from Mourinho. But Rob, the chairman of Fenerbahce is the industrialist Ali Koç. Fenerbahce is a member-owned club. It's not owned by anyone. So you have elections and presidents. We've seen that Real Madrid, Barcelona, clubs in Portugal, for example. And one thing he did say, he praised himself. He said other Turkish clubs, other teams were going for him. He also mentioned Aziz Yildirim, the former president who's challenging Koç for the presidency of Fenerbahce, also spoke to Mourinho. But I got there first. I got him. You know, I know he's a very wealthy man, but he's not spending his own money here. Turkish football and Turkish football clubs have often been in a financial tailspin because of overspending on expensive foreign imports. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes there.
They've never won a European trophy and they've not won the Turkish league since 2014. Well, of course, we are building up to the Men's European Championship in Germany, and an astonishing story that's been unfolding there in the build-up. This poll that's been called racist by the state broadcaster ARD, they actually polled people on whether they'd prefer more players with white skin playing for the national team. They found that 21% would. Who's thinking of this poll?
Incredible. Just unbelievable. Imagine, the state broadcaster thinking that was a good idea, or whoever thought it was a good idea, and then the bosses agreeing to it. I mean, it sort of seems the most sort of inflammatory thing you can possibly imagine. I actually thought the fact it was only 21% at a time where there's lots of sort of far right movements in Germany was actually quite a result for sort of right thinking people.
Obviously, grimly, it gives an insight into the nation, doesn't it?
It does. It's as I was saying, a sign of what Germany is like now. And don't forget, the team is captained by a German-born but Turkish heritage player, former Manchester City midfielder İlkay Gündoğan. Now, it's just such a divisive thing to have been done by the state broadcaster. Just for context, it would be the equivalent of the BBC doing that in Britain. And there's been some very strong condemnation of it by German national team players from and the coach Nagelsmann, Joshua Kimmich as well branded the whole thing racist. And they're about to host the Euros. Just this, it's again Germany sort of messing with its own build-up to a major tournament. Its teams are struggling. It's one of the worst. Has one of the worst results in recent history. The last World Cup and the Euros. It's the last thing they need to be going into a Euros like this.
I mean, think back to Mesut Ozil retiring from international football in 2018. I think he was cited racism, disrespect because of his Turkish roots. So this has been an issue for some time. And I think when you have something like that, this has happened not that long ago, for ARD to think this is a good idea makes it even more appalling.
It was after Ozil and Gundogan were pictured with the Turkish President Erdogan. There was a claim he wasn't loyal enough to the German nation.
I remember the quote very well from Ozil. He said, "I'm German when we win, but I'm Turkish when we lose," and that was quite strong. And the condemnation around that meeting with Erdogan and all the rest of it, it was such a major story at the time, wasn't it?
Well, the criticism was from the DFB themselves, from Reinhard Grindel, who was the president at the time, criticised the meeting.
Yeah, Grindel often outspoken during his time at the top of the DFB. In fact, he was then bundled out following a separate scandal later on.
And it was Julian Nagelsmann, the current Germany coach, saying, "I always find it bizarre that we go on vacation to get to know other cultures and then other cultures come here and we complain about it." So certainly the hope is this will have a transformative effect and hopefully expose outrageously offensive sections of society in Germany as they prepare to welcome Europe to the tournament. The first big movement of fans really since Euro 2016. Elsewhere in the world of football politics, the African Cup of Nations. The women's competition is due to happen this year, the men's next year, but they don't have dates for either of them.
Why is that? Well, is that sort of because of FIFA tournaments? Or?
Well, the issue is, hearing from the General Secretary of CAF, Veron Masengo Omba, speaking to the BBC, saying the challenge is because of the Olympics this year, and then the European season, where do you manage to fit it in? It's due to be staged by Morocco, but you've got a lot of the stars of the nations in Africa playing in Europe. Well, are they going to miss their club games? Then they've got the issue in terms of when do they put the 2026 men's competition, because there's the new Club World Cup to fit in June and July as well. That's also due to be staged by Morocco, the men's AFCON. So I suppose it just reinforces all the calendar issues, doesn't it?
It does. And, it's weird he's talking about these things. I don't know how many years ago Paris was picked as the Olympic host. So you've known about that for several years. The clash and this conversation about the Cup of Nations is frustrating and upsetting for a lot of people in Africa. Their tournament is extremely old. It's held on a biannual basis since it started, and they're saying, well, why do we have to change our system, our tournament, in order to fit in what European football wants?
News this week, though, from FIFA about the top scorer from this year's African Cup of Nations, Emilio Nsua. Turns out he's never been eligible to play for Equatorial Guinea throughout his 11 years in his international career.
Completely bizarre. 34 now. This was always known about, surely.
Well, he'd already served a ban, guys. This is the crazy thing about earlier in his career. He was already barred after playing for Equatorial Guinea. Well, it turns out he served his ban and then just started playing again for the next 10 years. And you've got to wonder what I think it's a FIFA and CAF question, how this man has had such a heralded long international career for Equatorial Guinea. Maybe scoring all those goals at AFCON finally said, who's this guy? We might need to look into him.
Yeah, certainly questions over the process there. To Asian qualifying for the 2026 World Cup, a landmark moment with Palestine going through to the next crucial round when they can qualify automatically for the World Cup. It comes after they drew 0-0 with Lebanon, now playing in Qatar. Gianni Infantino was there. What struck me most about this, there was a post on Infantino's Insta account associating with the Palestinian cause, something we haven't seen, I would say, directly during the current conflict between Israel and Hamas. Although he avoided being seen with a Palestinian flag, maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Yeah, obviously the hottest of hot potatoes. We talked about what happened in Bangkok a few weeks ago at the FIFA Congress, that effort by the Palestinian FA to have FIFA take action against the Israeli Football Association. That effort is now going to be judged by a committee Infantino announced in Bangkok that is due to rule before the Olympics on July the 20th.
Yeah, and some of those Olympic calls are perhaps about a case where Israelis have the status of Russians, where they'd have to compete as neutrals. Some suggestion it's not an outright ban completely being called for. Well,
this is because the Israeli team for FIFA, what makes it kind of urgent is the Israeli men's team has qualified for the football competition. So that's the reason why that date is. I don't know what they could be called as a team if they're playing in that competition, should that go ahead.
Probably the hope is for some sort of ceasefire and peace deal before then to avoid ruling, because it's not an easy one for FIFA to take a side on. Awaiting that, very challenging area for FIFA. It's news out of Pakistan this week. We don't talk about their football often, but Michael Owen has been part of an English delegation across there, helping to back the new Pakistan Football League.
What do we know about that? I'm sure a few rupees may have changed hands to convince Michael Owen to get himself over to Karachi, Lahore, or Islamabad, wherever he's got to for this. What do we know about this league?
Well, a statement from one ministry calling it a significant milestone in the government's efforts to promote sports. Then another reference, though, it's been called an illegal, unsanctioned league by the Pakistan Football Federation Normalisation Committees. I mean, this franchise league, perhaps not as clear-cut in terms of where it's heading. It's more notable the fact, obviously, an attempt to grow football in Pakistan because it's such a cricket-crazy country. Although maybe they need some distraction from the cricket this week.
Oh, my goodness, Rob. Whoa. Did either of you see the end of the... It will go down as a classic, certainly, but not for the right reasons if you're Pakistani. Beaten by the United States of America in the T20 World Cup in a game, I think, played in Texas in a super over. But the US should have actually won the game. Pakistan somehow managed to take it to a super over. Then you think, who's going to win a 1-over shootout? USA, America, who you don't think of as a cricket nation, or talent-loaded Pakistan. And it was one of the worst performances in a super over I've seen. So Pakistan losing in the Cricket World Cup being staged in the US and the Caribbean to the host.
Do we reckon this will actually elevate the sport in any way, even as a curiosity story in the US, or just newsrooms in the US will see it as, well, it's cricket, it's an irrelevance, who cares?
No, I think something like that, with the right framing and context of US beating cricket mad Pakistan is going to be a story. Funny enough, the Cricket World Cup was even on the front page of our newspapers before the tournament started. So obviously, there is some kind of energy towards the event.
I mean, there was quite a big crowd there in Dallas. It's like just under 40,000. So, I mean, I did look at it and think this is probably the best thing that could have happened for the tournament and the USA part of the tournament. You but on the other hand, I just think it was one of those things. Cricket, these collapses, sometimes these humiliations do happen. They've happened to England. I think England lost to Holland once, didn't they? Again, probably similar sort of large fish beaten by the minnows.
The other thing that can help in terms of gaining coverage is a bit of a row and controversy, which has happened with the pitch in New York, which has led to criticism from the Indian team in particular. Now, it's not good for the players or the teams who would have their matches and chances of winning perhaps harmed by the nature of the surface, but having a bit of an issue that takes it beyond just the action can stir some headlines, can't it?
Yeah. You saw the statement from the organisers, the ICC, the International Cricket Council, on the state of the pitch. I mean, for people not familiar with cricket, the pitch, the surface the game is played on, is such a vital component, and there have been some very low-scoring games in New York.
Yeah, obviously that competition does continue. Another sport that's launching a new competition, athletics, the year when they've broken rank with every other sport in the Olympic world by announcing prize money for Olympic gold medalists initially. Money clearly seems to be the answer of world athletics in terms of attracting audiences, because they've decided to launch the Ultimate Championships from 2026, going to be held every 2 years, the first in Budapest, featuring Olympic, World, Diamond League champions over 3 evening sessions with a prize fund of $10 million. So the biggest prize fund ever in athletics. Something that struck me is having big prize money enough to attract an audience.
Well, big prize money attracts the top athletes, so perhaps. I do wonder if this is all a sort of backdrop to the Sebco, Thomas Bach rivalry, because could this be a direct challenger to the Olympics? It's only one sport, and the Olympics is 26, 29. So it probably isn't, but it could be a sort of part of the battle between them.
To me, people need to have a reason to watch. So maybe this Paris Olympics brings more athletes to the fore in terms of their profile and attention. So you are making it a must-watch event. Some of these names, like in the Usain Bolt era, you really want to be there to have that ticket to say you were there. And that's where athletics and its communications just doesn't do enough to promote the athletes. And that's not the governing body responsible. It's the athletes themselves, the agents, national federations. They're just not doing enough to try to enhance the standing and the profile of the athletes, to create stories, to create interest and a buzz.
Yeah, I think there is an element of that, especially in this world with these streaming platforms and all the rest, and these players being social media personalities. But there also has to be a coherence with the sport. What are you watching? Is there a competition that you can follow for a season? There doesn't seem to be any great coherence to athletics at the moment. And maybe someone's going to run fast one day. The thing is, we would have missed it because we weren't tuning in, and we'll read about it. He's broken the world record. It just isn't a big story around these guys or the sports at the moment.
You dip in and out for 10 seconds.
Oh, 9 point whatever.
7.4.
I was going to say, it'd be pretty slow 100 metres if it is 10 seconds.
Yeah, blink and you've missed it.
Well, certainly longer than 10 seconds on this pod with so much to get through, particularly all those Premier League decisions this week. As ever, your feedback very welcome at Sport Unlocked on Facebook, Instagram and X.
Great stuff, guys. Really enjoyable that. Got through it a lot.
Thank you everyone for listening. Goodbye.